my gosh, turn around, there is an absolute monkey in your coat hanger. Just kidding. That is the first 3 seconds to try to just grab your attention. Now let's move along to the podcast. Okay, what are we talking about? We're gonna try to segment this one into about 3 parts. Let's try to move along into the first section. What are we trying to focus on? This is a little bit of a lesson. It correlates to trying to think about things in the form of doing things, in the form of not just thinking about things, but doing things, because it fundamentally changes the nature of your relationship with how you view the things that you're looking at doing in the short and the long term. And what I mean by that is that in essence, when you focus on things, it is an interest and such, but if you do them, if you try to do things, if you try to do them, then you physically become these things after all. So just trying to do things is valuable because it causes you to become these things. Fundamentally, chemically, in a chemistry sense, it's one thing to say you want to do something, but to actually say that you have done it, to actually do something, means you have actually become that thing. And it's ideal, especially as well, if you can get a little bit of accountability in the process to do the things, because it causes those things to fundamentally become the things that you want to do. By doing the things, it's about action, taking action. Moving on to the number 2 portion. What we're trying to focus on as DINKY TehC, and also in this lesson, is to consider making circuits. Circuitry is like electricity, and circles are also the things which I sometimes replace with the idea of opportunity, of potential. I call them circles. So in this instance, in this focus of thought, what we want to talk about is circuits like electricity. And if the circle is not complete, if the circuit is not complete, it's a similar mindset. After all, the circuit has to be complete in a similar way to electricity has to have a complete circuit to be electricity, meaning that a circle is not actually a circle unless it's actually got the right energy, the right components, the connections that make the item actual energy, actual electricity. The circle is not complete unless it's flowing with the right energy, like electricity. And what I mean by that is, in essence, you've got to have all the right components in order to make a certain aspect of potential become, in essence, profitable, yeah, oh yeah. So for something to be profitable, it doesn't exactly have to be cash flowing money, but the process has to be complete so that in essence in the future it's pointing in the direction so that it eventually can become monetarily profitable in essence. So all the ingredients have to be present so that it's possible to complete a certain potential item in essence. So the idea is to, before thinking about acting upon potential, which is also a symbol of a circle, is to have all the ingredients in place in essence to be able to follow through with a certain prospect or interest to focus on something, and then therefore be able to try to follow through with that thing if that is an interest to begin with, and have a circle as a mindset for potential and looking for potential, but also having the ingredients in place for how to facilitate and connect the dots of the circle so that the circle starts with the interest to do a certain thing and that it ends with the ingredients that are all in place once the ingredients are all put in the same basket to be able to make a potential item be able to come to fruition by just having basic ingredients in the basket of the interest to begin with, to be able to try to connect the dots, to be able to make the whole energy flow. Oh yeah, and then putting the energy in line so that the energy has the potential to flow, even if it starts in debt to begin with, that eventually it has the opportunity, the potential to grow into potential profitable monetarily energy eventually. And that way the circles that are start with a hypothetical interest have the ability to grow into real market value and real market profitability eventually one day by putting all the ingredients in place so that the electricity can fundamentally flow. Yeah. That is the second lesson. And the third and the last thing is just a basic thought and an interest to report on the notion that as DINKY TehC, this is kind of like a little bit of a news segmentation, segment reporting the news on a consistent basis by using this methodology of reporting through this podcast. And in this third segment of this little podcast situation, this little focus is on acknowledging that spiritual finance, which is sort of the hopeful interest that the DINKY Tech brand stands for, is trying to fundamentally push out in terms of podcasting and knowledge and thoughts and basic interests in the form of information and singing and such things that combine music and such. But basically, spiritual finance is fundamentally combining these elements. And what we wanted to report in this last little bit of this podcast is a reference that there's a connection between spiritual finance and also spiritual health, because spiritual finance relates to spiritual health, because fundamentally spiritual finance is entirely comprised of a person and the person's energy at the core of who they are as people. And as a result, it's necessary to acknowledge the person and all their energy inside as the core fundamental essence for spiritual finance to begin with, so that therefore transcends and translates directly into spiritual finance. Spiritual health in addition to spiritual finance, so that therefore correlates spiritual health in a direct sense to spiritual finance. So an example of spiritual health is the type of varying items that correspond to spiritual science that can cause improvement of health by basic acknowledgement of energy within the systems, within the core systems of human beings, so that not just health can improve. There's a book that is possible to reference out there. It's called Science and Health, and that sort of calls upon the interest to acknowledge the connections between science and health, but that's just sort of a basic understanding and a framework for how these things exist to begin with. But spiritual finance and spiritual health are a little bit different to begin with. A friend of mine is also working on certain people that sometimes, in terms of birth, there is a possibility to add energy to certain youth to be able to try to expand on their cellular mechanisms and transfer energy from one person to another. And that's sort of an example of spiritual health, you could say, in essence. And that is also acknowledging lines of obscurity of existence and such, and the fabric of existence and the lines which fence the existence within it, and therefore the in and out aspect of existing and such, and acknowledging the energies on both sides to be able to maneuver energies within this life and this existence by acknowledging both sides of the fence and being able to fundamentally acknowledge the energies to translate and transpose energies from one side to another. And when we take a step back and then just focus on spiritual finance, since that in a big way has to do with spiritual health, because that in many ways has to do with molecular focuses and molecular nature of energy within us as human beings, that's what spiritual health primarily focuses on. But in the essence of spiritual finance, it has to do with, I think so, an aggregate of all energy in the world, and beyond that, it's the world and all energies that surround the world, and molecules and mechanisms and cells and the energy within all of those cells and items as forms of statistics, and all of those statistics are functioning and lean on each other and fundamentally have the ability to cause influence on each other, and therefore things are correlative and relevant in a logical sense by acknowledging energy in all things as related to all other things in life as time goes on, and acknowledging statistics is a basic, fundamental, primary principle to be able to focus on the greater interest of acknowledging finance in the core of these global energies, to be able to therefore translate this information into money and monetary information in the short and the long term. That's the nature and the core and the essence of spiritual finance. So we wanted to just try to draw a bridge between spiritual finance and spiritual health as the last part of this little podcast today. Thank you so much for hanging around. Sorry if it's gone a little bit long, and I hope this is possible to understand by just spitting out words into the microphone this way. And I know that the tempo and the beat and the interest to try to make this music is basically kind of lost at the end of this podcast, but it's just kind of a long spit that basically has not been able to be that functional in terms of keeping a nice tune and beat to try to be singing like someone might sing in the shorter the long instance of a song, for example. But anyways, hopefully there's a little bit of information about spiritual finance mixed into all this stuff that draws a correlation to spiritual health, which makes a greater circle around both of those things to be able to really try to focus on the importance of the whole equation, to be able to leverage the whole mindset, to be able to continue to look towards DINKY Tech for future value in a hopeful sense. Thanks again. I hope you've had a nice afternoon as well. Thanks again. Alright, cheers, thanks again. And bye. DINKY Tech, bye.